Okay.
Well, okay, before you get started,
What?
stop. The missing shoes.
Real quick. Welcome to season 2 of Mystery Society.
Why did you say society like that?
Let's get started. Shit, it cut out right then. Alright guys, it's been a while. Welcome back to season 2 of the Mystery Society. We're your hosts, Nate Doan, Jenn Maraska, and Taylor Dahl. Oh, and I'm Taylor Dahl. Not one of them, I'm Taylor Dahl. Anyways, I'm sure many of you have heard of this case. It's an incredible story with a lot of open ends, which leave basically an infinite amount of possibilities of what could have happened here. So, without further ado, let's get started with the mystery of Dyatlov Pass. Let's just get some of the basic details out of the way, and I'll get started with this story. So this takes place in 1959 in Soviet Union?
Yep.
Well, it's now Russia, but it was formerly the Soviet Union in the Ural mountain range. We have 10 hikers that were pretty experienced and very young, healthy, who went on a trek up into the mountains and never returned. And the night they disappeared, it was about negative 30 degrees, I think Celsius. This tough, young, healthy crew hiked their way to just below the peak of Death Mountain. So that's where they decided to set up camp for the night. They were almost there. They set up their tent. They have one big tent that they all shared between the now 9 of them. Just a couple days before they reached this point, one of their members had fallen ill and dropped out of the trek. He's the only survivor of this mission. They set up camp for the night. They've taken numerous photos along the way. They have multiple cameras with them. They have multiple journals. They're recording lots of everything that's happening. Basically, overall, they just seem like a really happy, fun, outgoing group of people who just wanted some adventure. Nothing from the photos or the journal entries suggests any kind of anything malicious going on, any kind of ill intent between any of them. It just seemed like a normal trip.
Do we know if they knew each other before the hike?
All of them did, except for one man. So I'll get into that. I'll talk about. Here we go. All right. So these are the let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These are the 9 who did make it up to basically the peak of Death Mountain. We have Yuri Doroshenko. He is one of 3 Yuris that partook in this journey. One of the other Yuris was the one who fell ill and didn't complete the journey. So only 2 Yuris wound up actually dying on this trek. We have Lyudmila Dubanina, or Luda, as her friends called her. Igor Dyatlov. Igor Dyatlov was the leader of this trek. He was the most experienced of the group. Dyatlov Pass was not a place until after this journey. Alexander Kolovatov, Vinaida Kolmogorova. I believe, let me make sure, Vinaida and Lyudmila are the only 2 women. There were 2 women and 7 or 8 men, depending on if you're counting the one who didn't complete it. Rustam Slobodin, Nikolai Thibo-Brignole, and Simon Zolotaryov. So that last guy, he was the one that nobody in the group knew. He was part of a different expedition. I believe it wasn't going to be a tough enough trek for him, so he decided to, he put in a application basically to be transferred to another group going on a more difficult level of a hike. So this basically, not union, but this group that they are part of, that all these hikers are part of, put him in their group. The one who got sick and didn't finish, Yuri Yudin, that was his name. Yuri Yudin was the 10th member who didn't finish the journey because he fell ill. But Yuri Yudin, we do have testimonies from him too after the case was taken, and he gave his full account of everything that took place. He did say at one point in there that he made a mention of Zolotaryov being that nobody knew him, and it was a little weird. But then later, when they questioned him again and they asked if he wanted to make amendments to anything or change anything he said, no, everything I said is the truth. And they said, oh, I do want to make it clear that he was a really great guy and everybody got along really well with him. It might have sounded like that wasn't the case earlier, but like between the whole group, it doesn't seem like anybody was not pleasant with each other. You know, so I don't think there was any kind of conflict from within the group. So anyways, they get to basically the base of Death Mountain. They set up camp. That's the last we hear from them. People set out to try and find them eventually. It takes almost 20, I think a little over 20 days for them to find anything. And that's when they found the campsite. Here, let me go through the timeline. January 23rd, the 10 of them take a train. The next day, the 10 of them arrive at Sarov. They take another train, and then they take a bus, and then on January 26th, a truck takes the group to a logging community, and then the next day, January 27th, they hire a sled. So they've taken trains, buses, and then they took sleds, and then at this point, once they take the sled to a mining settlement, an abandoned mining settlement, Yuryudin he gets sick. He goes back with the sled at that point. Then on skis, they make the way up from that point to a river. This is on the January 29th and the 30th, to Aspia River, where they spend the night. They pitch their tent on the banks of the Aspia River. The 31st, they try to ascend the shortest path from Aspia to Lozva River, now called Dyatlov Pass. So it's basically then the next night, they go off their planned route. They cover about 2 kilometers and pinch their tent on the north slope of Kholat Syakhl, and I believe that's Death Mountain. February 2nd, the entire group is missing. The 12th, they were supposed to be back in Vizhay. They went missing on the 2nd. The 21st, so like 19 days later, is when search parties are finally going out to start looking for them. The 26th, so 24 days after they go missing, on the 26th of February 1959, their tent is found under a good layer of snow. Find their campsite. Their tent's collapsed. All their belongings are still packed away and inside the tent. No one is to be seen anywhere. The weirdest part, this part at least, the tent has been cut through with a knife from the inside.
So they're trying to, at least one person had this feeling of like trying to escape.
Yes, they had to have some feeling of, for some reason, they needed to get out of there quick enough that they couldn't just unzip the tent. Yeah, there's a lot more. But like, what could scare these experienced hikers so much that they go out into the cold, which they know is like really dangerous to do? They find 9 sets of footprints leading away from the tent. They disappear after a short while.
So that is everyone still. It's
Yes.
not like,
Yeah.
you know, some people
They
left
said-
and then like one person.
Everyone
started
said
behind.
8 or 9 pairs.
Okay.
But like, it's 9. If there's not a last pair leading somewhere else, and it's probably they just stepped in the footprints of somebody else and you just didn't see it. One of them had 1 sock and 1 barefoot. Negative 30 degrees that night. Once out of the tent, the footprints leading away all looked to be slow, calm footprints. They were not running away. They followed the direction of where all the footprints were leading to, which was up to a forest, up in the mountains, basically, nearby where they had set up camp. On the edge of the forest, they found lots of small branches cut from the trees, and they found a makeshift campfire underneath a large cedar tree that had lots of its branches cut off. By the fire, they found the first 2 bodies of both of our Yuris. We have Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonoshenko. They were both just wearing light flannel shirts and their underwear, nothing else. They were laid very close together in a way that suggested that they might have been moved after they had died. The cedar tree above them had branches cut to such a height that you would have had to climb, yet there were many trees around with lots of branches within reaching distance. So shortly after these two men were found, they found the bodies of, they found the body of Igor Dyatlov, the expedition's leader, was found between the campsite, between the campfire on the edge of the woods and their tent site. So we have tent site, the two people on the edge of the woods. They found Dyatlov in the middle, looking like he was crawling back towards the tent. Next, they found Rustam Slobonin and Zenaida Kolmogorova, who's one of the two women on the expedition. They found both of them as well at varying distances between the campfire and the tent, seeming like they were headed back to the tent. So now we have 5 bodies that we found out of the 9. So these first 5 hikers we found, it's mysterious why they left the tent. They left the tent for some reason. They all went out into this mountain range in probably a snowstorm, -30, and they all died of freezing. Not really anything that mysterious about that, except for why they left the tent. But we still have 4 more bodies, and they wouldn't be found for another 3 months. So it was on May 5th, 3 months after they disappeared, that they found the bodies of Lyudmila Dubanina, Seman Zolotaryov, the older gentleman who wasn't part of their group originally, Nikolai Thibault Brignole, and Alexander Kolevatov. So they found those 4 bodies in the woods, even farther from where they found the original, the 2 people on the edge of the woods. So these last 4, 3 of the last 4 bodies died in a much different manner than the first 5 to be found. So Dubanina, the other of our female hikers, had multiple fractures, multiple fractures. At least 10 of her ribs were fractured. This is one of the weirdest parts of this. It kind of makes sense where she was found, but it's really weird. Her tongue was missing, and most of her lips and mouth. Imagine if this is a small waterfall coming right here, right in front of me. She was kind of, and then creek and just forest. She was kind of found pressed into the waterfall.
Whoa.
Kneeling over.
What? Dude?
And so that's why it would make sense that her tongue and parts of her mouth after 3 months could have just been swept away. The autopsy concluded that the damage was caused by an impact of great force, caused during life as the result of a high-forced impact with subsequent fall, throw, or bruise to the chest of Dubanina. I think probably the easiest bet is that she fell, but that everybody fell. Thibault, Brignole, and Zolotaryov had similar physical injuries, which led to their death. Only Kolevatov was lucky enough to freeze to death like the other 5. The Yuris, their clothing was found farther into the woods with the last 4. It's very likely because of this that they had passed and were stripped from their clothes so that the others could help try and keep warm for longer. On the bodies, as well as a few meters from them, Krivonoshenko and Doroshenko's clothes were found. Trousers, sweaters, all clothing has traces of smooth cuts, as already photographed with the bodies of Doroshenko and Krivonoshenko.
So did anybody have a knife, or did they all have knives?
Yeah, there was one knife.
There's only
they apparently
one?
found it later. There was one that they found that wasn't, at least not left at the tent, that they had been using to cut off branches. I believe that was found with the 4 who were found in the ravine. There were 3 random items of clothing with an abnormally high level of radiation.
Oh,
I've heard that.
About this. That's
one
wild.
of the weirdest parts. I just kind of feel like ignoring that. I'm just I feel like if I have a good theory up until you throw that in there, and then I'm just I think those are most of the main facts to share with you guys. There's a lot to look into. But here's some of the theories. One of the theories is a fire broke out in the tent. They had stoves that miniature stoves that they brought with them to help them cook food. They did find burn marks on a couple of
Okay, I was
the
about to ask,
socks
did they,
on one of the
did
guys.
they find burns
on
or
one
like
of the
smoke
two.
damage or anything?
On one of the two Yuris, they found burn marks on his socks, I believe. But I don't think that really has anything to do with anything, because I think that it's quite possible if they finally got that fire going down by the woods, they were so fucking cold they just shoved their feet into that fire and got too close, and he could have scorched his socks.
Oh, I've
think
burned
that's
my
more
shoes
likely.
on fires.
Yeah.
I do it every time.
What, if you're sitting in front of a campfire and you just like have your feet up and you don't realize that your shoes are melting? I've done that a lot.
Another theory, which I kind of like, is that one of them could have had some kind of a breakdown and ran off, and the others all tried to chase after. It doesn't explain why. Doesn't explain why a lot of things. Why nobody would, if they're chasing after somebody, throw on their boots real quick.
Or
if they're
why
going
the
out into
entire
snow.
group ended up separated.
Why they got separated. My theory, which I feel like answers a good amount of questions, is that in the middle of the night, I think that perhaps there was a critical or just a very intense blizzard that came up out of nowhere. Here's the thing, they found a collapsed tent after 20 days in the snow.
So you
Makes
don't know
sense.
if it was collapsed that night.
That's what I think. That's what I think makes the most sense, is that a blizzard kicked up, it was so strong, maybe they didn't fasten everything correctly, the tent gets knocked over. You can't put on your clothes and find anything when your tent is collapsed over you.
Right.
You can't find the zipper. I think this one of them had to cut their way out of the tent because they were trapped in there. And then they all made their way out, and once there, I think in those harsh conditions, they can't really see. They probably can't find their lanterns or matches or anything. I think that that's why they left the tent, and they begin heading downhill to gather firewood. I think it's possible that during this time, whoever was up in that cedar tree fell and was injured. At this point, they couldn't keep going. We now have an injured one of the 9. Makes things a lot worse. I think at this point, the group split up. I think that we have our injured victim at the campfire. We have more people who figured they need to either gather more fire or build a shelter. There's one detail I left out. They found an almost completed makeshift shelter where they basically had dug down into the snow, carved out an area, and had been putting branches that they'd cut off as the floor to help keep that heat in. I even think maybe those 4 went out to go get more firewood or stuff to bring back to our injured friend, and that one person had to stay with him at all times. So I think there was 2 people at the fire at all times. We have 4 going off to gather more firewood. At this point of splitting up, I think that Igor Dyatlov also decided to take a small group back to the tent to get their supplies. This would be the hardest of the missions, and I think as the leader he would have taken it on. I think it was way too difficult for them, and they never made it back to the tents. And I think climbing back up that hill where they were in the harshest conditions, they had no coverage from the trees. The way that they were crawling and their bodies were found made it seem like they were fighting the fucking wind to get up this mountain. They all died. I think that the people at the campfire, if the fire was ever lit, it went out too shortly after the other people left with the knife. And now we have 2 people at the campfire, one of them injured, the other not injured but doesn't have a knife or basically anything else. And I think that they froze as well, and they died while the 4 of the ravine 4 were out getting more firewood. They come back to try and start the fire up again and find their 2 friends dead. The other ones aren't back yet. They strip the 2 bodies down for the extra warmth, and they decide to go back out into the woods, and that's when they start making their shelter. I think they're making their shelter, they go out to get more firewood, they get too close to an edge that isn't stable, the snow collapses beneath them and they all fall into the ravine and die, except for Kolevatov, who's now alone, slightly injured, and freezing.
Yeah.
Probably fell into the creek, trying to make his way anywhere, probably back to the shelter, and freezes to death. And that's what I think is like the most likely thing that happened.
That's very thorough.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. A lot
Yeah.
of the stuff you hit on was like, when you said it, I started kind of thinking
Right.
in those lines. I definitely think Igor, for sure, was going back. I think maybe the blizzard seemed like it died down a little
Right.
bit because of
Yeah.
where they'd gotten to.
Yeah.
And then they were like, all right, well, then let's go back and get whatever we can because we need all of our stuff.
Yep.
And I think it just didn't work out.
Yep.
That's too bad. That's really a dark story.
Yeah, it is. It's a very sad story for a bunch of young, healthy people who just, I don't know, just didn't make it home. Yeah, there's a lot. I do just want to say, CNN.com says Russia reopens investigation into 60-year-old Dyatlov Pass mystery. Yeah.
Really curious to see what this recent investigation is going to uncover.
Right.
Just because, I mean, with you looking at the Dyatlov Pass website, it seems very comprehensive. Like, there is already so much information.
Yeah.
What else could they possibly find at this point?
Yeah.
Right.
No, this is I'm very, very interested to see where the investigation goes. And even if it doesn't find any new evidence, but you have really some of the best minds looking at the ridiculous amount of evidence that's already out there.
Right.
Yep.
Like, there's
Put
just
those
so
pieces
much.
together a little better.
Yeah.
It's the Sherlock Holmes thing. It's there's probably the one answer they're just looking over because it might even be like too obvious.
Right.
It just doesn't occur to them that it is even possible or something like that. And that's because I don't know. There's so much info. Like I know a lot of time passed, and that's probably got a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
But we may never know. You know. Here, this is the resolution to the case in 1959, May 28th. On January 31st, 59, going back in the valley of the Ospia River and knowing about the difficult conditions of the relief of height 1079. 1079, if you saw on the map, was the number for Death Mountain, or for whatever that mountain was called. I think that's the peak number, was 1079. Where the ascent was supposed to be, Dyatlov, as the leader of the group, made a gross mistake allowing the group to begin the ascent on February 1st, only at, it looks like 1500 hours. And that it was apparently a lot later than they were supposed to go out. Later on the ski trail, which was preserved at the time of the search, it was possible to establish that the hikers, moving to the valley of the fourth tributary of the Lozva River, were 500 to 600 meters to the left, and instead of the pass formed by the peaks 1079 and 880, they went up on the eastern slope of height 1079. This was Dyatlov's second mistake. So I guess this is what took them off course too much. They found themselves at unprofitable conditions for spending the night and decided to pitch the tent on slope of height 1079 so that in the morning of the next day, without losing altitude, go to the Mount Otorten, to which the distance in a straight line remained about 10 kilometers. On February 26th, on the eastern slope, the group's tent was found with all the equipment and food in it. The tent and all that was in it were well preserved. Inspection of the tent shows that it was set correctly and provided accommodations for the hikers. In the tent, there were 2 blankets, backpacks, storm jackets, and trousers. The rest of the blankets were crumpled and frozen. On the blanket were found several loin pieces. Neither traces of a struggle nor presence of other people were found in the tent or near it. External injuries of the bodies or signs of a fight, the presence of all the valuables of the group, and also taking into account the condition or the conclusions of the medical examinations for the causes of death of the hikers, it is concluded that the cause of their demise was overwhelming force, which the hikers were not able to overcome. That is it. That is what they said. And then they said the criminal case on the death of the group of hikers and further proceedings are to be terminated. Well, thank you. That was the first episode of Season 2 of the Mystery Society, Into the Forest. We'll see you next week when Jen's going to tell us the mystery of the Bennington Triangle. See you then.